Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back. The book we will be reading today is Aliens Are Coming by Megan McCarthy. Hey, kids, did you know that in the 1930s, most Americans did not have their own TVs? But you know what they did have? A radio. Folks tuned in to hear music, plays, and comedy shows. But the radio was more than entertainment. It delivered the latest news from around the world, and because Americans believed what they heard, they were easily fooled by a radio play that sounded like an actual news bulletin. The reaction was astonishing. Here is the story. It was October 30th, 1938, the day before Halloween. Broadcasting on the radio that evening were Romain and his orchestra playing a tango. Suddenly, the music stopped. Announcer, ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Furrow and the Mount Jennings observation, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions on the planet Mars. Announcer, ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object believed to be a meteorite fell on a farm in a neighborhood of Groves Mill, New Jersey. Phillips. This is Carl Phillips out of Wilmer Farm, Groves Mill, New Jersey. Well, I hardly know where to begin. The object doesn't look very much like a meteor, at least not the meteors I've seen. Just a minute. Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. Voices. She's moving. Look, the darn thing's unscrewing. Phillips, ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling out of a hollow top. Someone or something. Are they are they eyes? Good heavens. Something's wiggling out of the shadow. Now it's another one and another. They look like tentacles to me, but that face. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. Wait, something's happening. Phillips, a hump shape is rising out of the pit. Now the whole field's caught fire. The woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles. It's spreading everywhere. Announcer, ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are invading army from the planet Mars. Announcer, the bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as the Martians approach. Streets are all jammed, noise and crowds like New Year's Eve in city. Enemy now in sight. Announcer, Martian cylinders are falling all over the country. One outside of Buffalo, one in Chicago, St. Louis. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Was this the end of the world? Radio listeners across the country were in a state of panic. Operators were flooded with phone calls about the broadcast. Princeton professors looked for rocks from the outer space. Cars filled of frantic drivers clogged the highways. One man thought he saw a Martian spaceship. Police arrived at the farm in Grover's Mill and only to find an empty field. All right, so do we think what they saw was true? Let's see. Meanwhile, the actors from the Mercury Theater on CBS Radio continue with their radio show, unaware of the terror they caused outside their door. The alien invasion was just a story. Using actors and sound effects, Orson Welles, and soon to be famous director and actor, had created an all too realistic version of the popular science fiction novel The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. If your doorbell rings and nobody's there, Wells said at the end of the broadcast, that was no Martian. It's Halloween. Author's notes. Orson Welles described the War of the Worlds radio play as the Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying "boo." That was some boo. Minutes after the end of the broadcast, police stormed the studio, play scripts and questioning actors. The action by radio the reaction by radio listeners were alarming and widespread. How could this happen? It all began when Wells thought a science fiction novel needed a new twist. The original War of Worlds, written in 1898 by H.G. Wells, told of alien vessels terrorizing London and eventually the world. Creating a play based on a novel by Orson Welles' favorite project, he wanted to take the tale out of the 19th century and bring it into the 20th. With World War II approaching and news of Hitler's army advancing through Europe, often interrupting radio stations, Wells knew using a news broadcast format would give the play a realistic feel. He assigned the playwright Howard Koch, later famous for his playwright in the movie Casablanca, the duty of giving the novel a complete overhaul. I realized I couldn't use practically nothing but the author's idea of the Martian invasion and his description of the appearance and their machines. By chance, Coach picked Groves Mill, New Jersey, a small town near Princeton, to be the stage for the alien invasion. Coach took a day off from working on a script to drive to New Jersey. On his way back to New York City, he stopped for gas and brought a road map. I spread out the map, closed my eyes, and put down the pencil point. It happened to fall on Grover's Mill. I liked the sound. It had an authentic ring. What do we think the word authentic means? While Coach put the finishing touches on the radio play, the CBS actors prepared for their roles. Frank Reddick, one of Carl Phillips, the reporter, studied tapes of the 1937 disaster so that his delivery would contain a convincing sense of urgency. Wells urged another actor, Kennedy Delmar, to imitate the voice of President Roosevelt, reporting the grave news that the United States was under siege by the alien species. At 8 p.m. on October 30th, 1938, the prank began. The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It seems that many Americans missed this announcement. Many also miss the fact that Wells set the play in the future, when the war scare was over. The announcer informed listeners that what they were hearing was a play two more times in the middle of the broadcast and once at the end. The next day, newspapers reported that the broadcast that the high the broadcast has caused radio story of the Mars raid causes panic. New Jersey homes abandoned after fictional broadcast read a headline in the Los Angeles Times. The New Jersey Times stated that the Norwalk, New Jersey, more than 20 families were spotted fleeing their homes, draping their faces in wet cloths, believing that there was a gas raid. A man from Dayton, Ohio, called the New York Times switchboard and asked, "What time would it be at the end of the world?" A man from Harlem insisted that he'd heard President Roosevelt on the radio, warning people to flee. Hospitals gave tranquilizers to many frightened listeners. A reverend calmed his congregation and prayed for deliverance. Another New York Times headline read, "Princeton hunt meteor in vain." The man from San Francisco wanted to help fight the invaders, saying, "My God, where can I volunteer my services? We've got to stop this awful thing." It is estimated that the broadcast fooled as many as 1 million listeners. Remarkably, the broadcast even fooled the playwright. Exhaustion due to working hard all week on the script caused Coach to sleep through the pandemonium. And it wasn't until the next day, after hearing much frantic chatter about the invasion, that he got spooked. "I jumped to the conclusion that Hitler had invaded some new territory and that the war we all dreaded had finally broken." Newspapers hyped up the hysteria. In the play, the meteor fell in the field on the farm in Grover's Mill. The papers found that Wilson farm in Grover's Mill close enough. Reporters interviewed the farmer and photographed his farm. "Little did I suspect," Coach later recounted, "when I made the choice that the day following the broadcast, Enterprise Farm in Grover's Mill would be charging a 50-cent parking fee for the hundreds of cars that swarm in his farm bringing tourists who wanted to see the spot where the Martians landed." Orson Welles commented on the commentation, saying, "It's too bad that so many people got excited, but after all, we kept reminding them that it wasn't really true. You can't do much more and hope to keep up any impression of suspense when you're trying to play. Surely one would assume that in 1938, panic would not reoccur, but as always, history repeats itself." In 1944, a radio station in Chile put on an adaptation of Coach's play. As happened in America, chaos ensued. After listeners realized that what they've heard was just a play, they took matters into their own hands and hurled fury balls of paper at the radio station's window, launching it into flames and causing $350,000 worth of damage. Troops arrived for the riot. Newspapers in America printed the story with headlines such as "Tanks Riders After Mars, Broadcast Six Lanes." In 1974, in Rhode Island, radio station WPRO presented "The War of the Worlds" using Welles' technique. Just as almost 40 years earlier, listeners seemed to miss this disclaimer at the start of the broadcast. A police officer manning the switchboard told the Providence Journal. The phone rang, and on the other end was a hysterical caller, blurting out something about blue flame from Mars descending on the tiny island. And even the superintendent of Newport Bridge called to find out if the bridge had been knocked down. There were other similar radio broadcasts that warned of Martian invaders. Although not all resulted in panic, a good number did. Wells' coach and the Mercury Theater actors had set the stage for pranksters everywhere. As one 1938 radio listener put it, it was just about the smartest play I'd ever heard. With the possibility of other life forms somewhere in the galaxy, people will continue to wonder and believe. Will there be future hoax? Would you be fooled? What would you do if an extraterrestrial came to visit you? I hope that if a saucer ever landed on my property, Howard Koch wrote in his book, The Panic Broadcast, I will have the sense to hold out my hand and invite its occupants in my house for a sandwich and a cup of coffee. That is the end of this book. I hope you guys have enjoyed this book, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.